both of them, right? What drew you to the story that you told?
Having us. Thank you to OFFA and to film.ca and sponsors and for and that I'd been to 10 years before, how do you spell serendipity? And had a tough time finding the museum. And sure enough, Soon was still working at the museum. And as soon as I saw his face, I knew it was the same man. 10 years later, we reconnected and had been building the story in the film ever since. Nate came on, I don't know, 5 or 6 years ago. We had a couple other cinematographers. It's been a real challenge, as any filmmaker in the room knows. It's a very making a documentary film is always a challenge. But so I would say, in short, it was his story that really pulled me in, and Nate can certainly speak to where he got hooked as well.
I just wanted a trip to Cambodia.
Sorry, I just got that.
Oh, sure. Hello.
Not even working.
I can just project. Hello. This one? Hello. There we go. That's better. So I got involved because David had started working on the film about 4 years before I got involved. And you'd shown me, I'd seen little snippets of footage, and there was Sean was a part of it, and then Simon was a part of it. And at a certain point, David was raising money to try and finish the film, so I came on board to help cut a trailer, like a trailer. And then as I was watching through the footage, I thought, wow, this is actually a really compelling story. So I went to Cambodia, I met Soon, and we became very good friends. And then I just kind of, at that point, I was just like, okay, let's finish this film. I think for me, it was also the image of a guy who was telling a story about his life, where he was regretful about what he had done, but he was living, at the time he was in a museum, and he was basically surrounded by these physical reminders of his past. And I thought that was just to me, that was a very compelling image for a story about someone who's trying to move forward, and that the way by doing that is sort of inhabiting this physical reality that they've constructed that is recreating their past.
Kind of like an alcoholic who's working in a bar.
Yeah.
What struck me about this, one of the themes in the film that I liked was kismet, karma, right? He touched on that a lot. Was that a concept that you believed in going into it, that got strengthened throughout the film, or did he bring you into that light of being?
That was something that just came up through the filming. We had discussions about it at a certain point. There was an interview that I had done with him where he talked about that. And then as we were constructing the edit, we realized this actually is a pretty integral part to his own, his way of understanding things. And then of course, being in Cambodia, I mean, there's temples. So it's there's also, it's very physically present as well. So that was another thing. It became more clear to me once I'd gone to Cambodia that was necessary, just because it's so much a part of the culture and the lifestyle that I felt like it was important to at least showcase it. But then in talking to Soon, it was clear that was a very integral part of his own life.
I hope we showed through the film that Soon's an artist, he's a storyteller, he's a musician, he's quite a talented man, really. But I think he's also very much a philosopher, and he's asking some pretty serious questions about his own understanding of karma and Buddhism, and what does it actually mean to him, and what does his suffering actually mean? And I think, if you were to get an opportunity to see it when it's on a platform and you can pay $6.95 to see it, you might see that embedded in the film, that it is a constant thread. There's a sense of the unknown for him about it all, if that makes sense. But yeah, absolutely a thread. You can't go to that part of the world and not sort of be introduced to well, just not only the culture, but just a whole other way of seeing.
So the other question I want now is to talk about forgiveness, right? And having watched the second film, is it more difficult to then forgive someone? Like, to me, this concept of forgiveness, him forgiving himself, right? And others forgiving him. I don't know if that's as important. Just talk to me about the theme of forgiveness as it goes through there, because I think that in situations like that, in war, where you have personal loss, where you have, even in life, where you're wronged, that idea of forgiveness is hard for people to swallow, right? And it is a very big person who forgives themselves and forgives others. So I wanted you to just talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think Soon is coming to terms with that through the storytelling itself, if that makes sense. So every time he tells the story, and what's so interesting about, or at least what I've certainly learned about trauma and my relationship with Soon and with others, is that the retelling of the story can be both, a positive thing and not always necessarily a positive thing. And so the retelling of it is a pathway towards healing for Soon, but not necessarily for everyone else. And so I've met many Cambodians who said, I just want to forget. Forgiveness isn't even really a part of the conversation. It's just, why can't we just move on? And yet Soon firmly believes, as do I, that forgiveness is an essential part of all of this, of every conversation that we have and of every relationship that we're in. And so without a doubt, it's a constant challenge, because I think it raises the question, are there things that we can't actually forgive, right? How do we, maybe we can move on, right? And so one of the things I love about the way Nate shot it and Doug and Nate edited it together is that Soon is always on the move. He's always walking, he's always moving somewhere, trying to get a better understanding, trying to get clarity, trying to come to terms with this thing called the past. And it's a struggle without a doubt, but yeah, very much so an important theme for sure.
And very cathartic, I would think, for him to be able to tell his story and live it in such a way again through the retelling, right? Might cut out or not, but I think that that's part of the forgiveness is to tell it. Oh, there we go. Is to tell your story so that others hear it and that you continually not live it, but aren't. And I think that's why he's in the museum, right? He doesn't want to forget about it.
He doesn't want to forget about it, and yet when he remembers it and retells it, it can change. The story does actually change. The more he drinks, the story changes. It's really fascinating, and I think this is something about deep trauma that maybe we don't have a rich understanding of quite yet. And we couldn't always, Werner Herzog says, the famous documentarian, I don't necessarily care if the story I'm telling is true. I just hope it points to a greater truth. And I think that would be Soon, in the retelling of it. But he's a born storyteller. Yeah. When we created, we worked alongside him and we were creating, some of the moments and capturing footage and so on. People would hang out with him for 60, 90 minutes, longer even. And so TripAdvisor reviews would be, don't go to the museum to see the stuff or to hang out or to get a picture in the old rusty Russian tank. Go and hang out with this man, And Nate, would you say that's something that pulled you in? Like he's got a way about telling a story, doesn't he?
Well, so he's also just a very charming person and a very funny person. That was another thing too. I was just thinking of as you were saying that also I thought was interesting about him is when we think of someone who's like a child soldier and we think of them grown up, we think of someone who's like hardened and kind of like rough around the edges and has like a scar on their face. But Soon there's a kind of I felt there was almost like a childlike quality to
Yes.
him. It was
Like an innocence almost.
yeah, it was just something that I wasn't expecting in terms of his general demeanor. And like you were saying, like he's a very compelling storyteller, but he's also just a very fun guy to hang out with. But it's interesting because like you'd spend time with him and you'd get lost in the moment. You'd just be hanging out, and then he'd say something. You'd go, "Oh, right, like this guy. This was his history. This was his past." So there was also a way in which, just on the surface, it was, I guess, sort of going against what I had. If you had just sort of told me like, "Oh, I'd met this guy," I would have constructed a very different image of who that looks like.
And thank you, Hollywood, for that, right? So the last question I have for you guys is, what is the key message that you want people to walk away with from this film?
So I'm way too much of a philosopher to answer that question directly. I hope people walk away with way more than one thing. But if I had to, put it down, it would be that there's room for the other. That sometimes we just need to sit down and shut the hell up and listen. And I think in having worked as a consultant in international development for so many years, we're sometimes too sort of willing to take the clipboard with us and to, here's how it's all done. Here's the to-do list. Here's the checklist. Oh, you want to drill wells? Let me show you how to do that. And I think that we would have been in a much different place, in a much different world, if we could just sit down and listen. And so we really tried to consciously do that over many years. As we got to know him, as we became friends with him, as we got to know Salong and Melissa and others that didn't make it into the film, it really was about trying to represent their story as well as we can. So yeah, the idea of putting yourself in others' shoes, that love is not really that crazy of an idea after all, and we really are all in this together. So that was about 9 things, I think.
That's okay. That's a theme that's been through this entire film festival for the ones that I've done, is that being open, being vulnerable, being willing to listen, and to seeing people for who they are beneath who they present and beyond what we think they are, despite what they've done, right? So,
well, I think there's a huge question too about, and it's the International Criminal Court has just in 2021 convicted the first child soldier coming out of Uganda, and Joseph Kony and the Lord's Resistance Army. And I think this is a really interesting period of history, because here's a man who was not only, kidnapped at 19, he's now 38. They're putting him away for 25 years for theoretically crimes he committed as a child.
yeah.
And so there's another film out there that you might want to dig up or look for at some point. It's called Theater of Violence, and it's asking some of those same questions that we're asking in our film as well. Just who gets to decide what justice really is, and I think it's interesting too, Nate, that you said there's something childlike about him, because it's possible he is kind of frozen in time to some degree, because
Could be a psychological trigger to help protect himself.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Thank you guys very much for taking the time to come up here and talk to me, and for sharing such
Thank you for having
vulnerable
us.
film. And it was
Thanks to
important.
everyone here for joining us today. Really
Thank
appreciate
you.
you coming up.
If I could just ask everybody to take the conversations out of the theater, they need to clean it up for a very tight turnaround for the next film. So I'm not kicking you out. I'm just kindly asking you to make your way out.